Okay, hi everyone. We're back. I'm here with Preston Dennett again. Hi, Preston.
Hi, Sharon.
Thank you so much for being here once more. I really, really love talking to you, and you have so many stories to share. Your research is how long have you been researching the metaphysical world that's the most interesting of all?
Oh gosh, it is now 35 years,
Wow. Yeah.
most of my life.
Okay. So you have a lot of research under your belt, and you've written, again, remind me, 28 books.
That's right. Almost finished with 29. So.
Yay. Awesome. Whoa, you're a writing machine, aren't you?
I am. Yes. Thank goodness I love doing it. Otherwise, I'd
Yeah.
be doomed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for doing it because the world needs it. We need it. The way you're sharing and helping people, I believe that sharing and things like that helps, and you know this, I'm sure, you helps others realize that if they're experiencing something, that maybe they're not the only ones and they're not so crazy after all.
Yeah, I'd be lost without books. I have a library of 1,000, but well, more.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started having OBEs, out of body experiences, I mean, I thank God for Robert Monroe and Marilyn Hughes and
Oh yeah.
Robert Peterson and Robert Bruce and
Mm-hmm.
all those guys and girls.
Totally. Yeah.
Marilyn
Yeah.
Knight.
So a couple of Marylands there. I haven't read their books. I'm gonna have to read theirs because I'm the same way. I have a huge library of out-of-body experience. Marilyn Hughes, you said?
Oh yeah, you've got to read Marilyn Hughes books.
Okay.
She's one
Marilyn
of my
Knight.
favorite. Yeah.
Nice.
Marilyn Knight worked with Robert Monroe. I like her style because her out of bodies are different than a lot of people. She's like still conscious in the body while she's out there exploring.
Oh, you mean Rosalind Knight?
Oh, Rosalind Knight. Yeah.
Yes, I have her books. Yes,
Rosalind
yeah,
Knight.
yes, they are amazing. Yes, her experiences are amazing. I laughed so hard. Do you remember in her book when she talks about, and we're just getting started talking, do you remember in her book when she talked about the beings that came to lift her up out of her body, and they and they weren't sure if it was the right body, the right person, and they were arguing among themselves?
I do. Yeah. That's what you get for switching rooms.
That's what it was. She switched rooms. And they were like, is this her? Well, I don't know. You should know. It was funny to hear that narrative that she shared about them arguing. You don't think of higher beings as having the human qualities that we have.
I know, it's fascinating because it makes you realize just how normal it is on the other side. They're just talking and shooting the breeze and joking and wondering what's going on.
Right? Okay, so I have Preston's all your information down in the details. This is our third conversation together, and the beginning of many more, I'm sure. Hopefully you will. Okay, you'll honor me with that. Thank you. And so let's start out with you sharing some of your research on, and experiences too, because I know you've been wanting to talk about this. UFOs in the schoolyard and in drive-ins. I want to hear about that.
Yeah, this is just so fascinating to me because I've known for years that UFOs, the ETs, are sort of announcing their presence in a quiet, subtle way. Sometimes not so subtle, but they're not landing. They did try to kind of land on the White House lawn, but we shot at them. But it's clear they want us to know about them because they put on what are called displays. Researcher Frank Salisbury from the University of Utah, I think it was the first to coin that term. He says these guys are wanting to be seen. They're showing themselves on purpose. And there are many examples of that, like Phoenix Lights, perhaps, or the Gulf Breeze, the big waves of sightings. But not just a couple years ago, just doing my research, going through the books and reading, and came upon that case from Ruo, Zimbabwe, which of course is world famous. I mean, that was 1994, November, when 2 UFOs landed next to Ariel Elementary School in Ruo, Zimbabwe. And some 200 kids were on the playground. At least, I think half of them saw it. Beings came out and communicated with some of the students. It's an amazing case, probably, Africa's most famous case. Best verified. It's incredible.
I remember hearing about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just an awesome case, and seeing the kids talk about it and seeing their drawings, it's very touching.
And these ETs were human, right?
Humanoid. I wouldn't say
Humanoid.
they're human looking even, because they have big dark eyes, short, squat. Yeah, not human like us, but close enough.
Right.
And I remember thinking, wow, that's such a cool case. And thinking about it, I'm like, there was another case. And it took me a second to think of it, but it was at 1966 in Melbourne, Australia, at Westall High School. And it struck a chord with me because I'm like, hey, there were 2 UFOs there, well, more, some were flying around, but 2 landed. Again, right behind the school in a grove of trees. Same thing. Beings weren't seen in this one, at least according to pretty much all the witnesses. There's one who says, but it's controversial. At any rate, there was 300 students who saw this, teachers as well. And this went on for 20 minutes. I mean, it was a huge encounter. And this is Australia's most widely viewed, most famous encounter. I'm like, wow, here's 2 encounters, widely separated, and they are the most famous encounter in that country. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both at schools. And that started me thinking. I'm like, because I knew of another one at Broadhaven Elementary School in Wales. And I had to look up the details because it was kind of sketchy in my head. But I'm like, wow, they landed next to the playground in a grove of trees. This was seen by about, I think it was like 12, 15 students. And beings came out, and teachers denied seeing it, but later turned out there was 1 teacher and 2 school workers, adults, who saw it. So I'm like, that's 3 famous cases. I wonder if this is a thing. And I started really kind of searching through my mind, because I had my own case, a couple of them. I talked to a guy, Mike Evans, who had missing time at a Catholic school in Hawthorne. And my sister-in-law saw grays in front of Stagg Street Elementary School. She was an adult, but they were standing in front of the elementary school. So I started thinking, I'm like, oh, and instantly I thought of the Hillsdale, Michigan sightings in 1966, which turned out to be 2 weeks before the Westall sighting in Melbourne. The Hillsdale College, Michigan sightings involved 87 students and school officials, a UFO hovering for 2 hours, and it landed. It landed next to the school. A lot of people don't know that about the Hillsdale case, but I looked it up, and yeah, this thing actually landed in the swamps. And I'm like, wow, this is a thing. I think this is a thing. Because that's kind of always been my specialty, is looking for patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Like UFOs hovering over prisons. I found out that was a thing. UFOs over graveyards, UFOs over mines. These are UFO attractors. For certain, rocket launches. Certain things attract UFOs.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, wonder if schools do. And I started looking through the books that I have. And whoa, here's one, and here's another. Here's another. And then I'm like, well, let's dig deeper. This is getting exciting. And I went to the UFO databases that are online, and there's a bunch of them. NUFORC, MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, and National UFO Reporting Center, and APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. And of course, I've got a ton of newspapers. I subscribe to the UFO news clipping service. Thank God I did that, because that's turned out to be a really valuable tool.
What's the name of it?
the UFO news clipping service.
Oh, okay.
It's now defunct,
Oh,
unfortunately.
okay.
You might be able to get a hold of back issues, but I've got like 25 years of it.
Mhm.
So I'm like, all right, this is cool. This would be a really interesting research project, and maybe even an article if I can find like 10, 20 cases. And I didn't find 10 or 20 cases. I found over 100.
Wow.
So I was utterly shocked. I mean, this knocked my socks off. And I'm reading these accounts, and in some cases just weeping
Oh,
because they're just so incredibly touching. Half the cases, Sharon, half that I found of the 100 are elementary schools.
mm,
And we all love kids. I mean, kids are
sure.
adorable. And elementary age is, 5, 6, 7 years old, 8,
Right.
9. And they're such innocent, precious witnesses. And to hear them describing this stuff is mind-blowing. So I found out some very interesting things about Schoolyard Encounters. And the first most interesting thing to me was that it started pretty much precisely in 1950, which is right when the modern age of UFOs, I mean, on the tail end of it, 1947, is when it kind of came in big time. And because we were exploding nuclear bombs.
Right.
And this is what many researchers believe is what happened, is we attracted the attention of the universe.
Sure. Sure.
And
Yeah.
so my thinking is like, okay, we're messing around with nuclear power and they're coming here and realizing it. And this is when they started their publicity campaign. And they're like, how can we do this? How can we convince these poor, ignorant, violent earthlings that there are other people out there without completely upsetting their society? Overturning religion and all this stuff. And I think this is what they decided to do, is visit schools. And the reason I say that is because these are not average sightings. These are not the average sighting. And there was a study on this by, I think it was Peter Davenport, the National UFO Reporting Center, because they receive more reports than just about anybody. And they said the average sighting is an anomalous light at night, darting by. It might stop and hover, and off it goes. And it's usually less than a minute. And there's an average of 4 witnesses. And it's quite high up in the sky, thousands of feet. That's your average sighting. These schoolyard sightings are the complete opposite of average. They are, as a rule, daylight sightings. There are 4 or 5 at night, but most are at 11 a.m. during recess, lunch, or lunch or recess.
When kids are going to be outside, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think the UFOs are, waiting for their audience to come out. And second is this are very low level sightings. And by that, I mean, we're talking 100 feet, 50 feet. And this is shocking to me. In 1/3 of the cases, they land and humanoids are seen, or humanoids are seen.
Wow.
So when you consider how many sightings there are, the vast majority are at night. And landings are super rare. I mean, they really are compared to sightings. And yet here, the schoolyard cases, they're not rare at all. 1/3 of the cases. It's like, what is going on here? Another really profound difference is they are long lasting. It's not a flyby. These things target the school, appear on the horizon, or way up there like a star, and come zooming down and stop over the school, go around it or land, and then we'll stay there for more than, I'd say, 5 minutes is the way low end. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. Some are there for over a period of days. They come back days. So this is like, oh my God, this is so clearly intentional. There's clearly an agenda behind this. And it's almost inescapable that what the agenda is. I mean, it's so darn obvious that they want to be seen. And they will put on displays. I mean, they will dart around for you, or release smaller craft, or flash their lights, or make sounds. And so, yeah, starting in 1950, and this is all over the world, everywhere, Canada, all across the US. I think there's a few states I couldn't find cases in, but I know they're there. Mexico, Peru, Brazil, all Argentina, all across Africa. We've got numerous African cases all across Europe, lots in England. I've got two cases in China, Australia, New Zealand. Could not find any cases in Russia, but I know they're there.
Yeah, just weren't reported, maybe.
Yeah, I don't have a good Russia database. There's a few books, but I couldn't, but I know they're there. So yeah, over 100 cases. And here's something really interesting. When the Hillsdale College incident happened, Jim and Cora Lorenzen, who you may know are pioneering researchers. They started.
The name sounds familiar. Your names, yeah.
Yeah, they started APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, the first citizen UFO group. So thank God for Jim and Coral. I love them. They've written, 8 books, I think it was, and really changed the face of UFO research. They were the first. No one was taking this seriously.
Wow.
And when Hillsdale happened in 1966, March, they said, wow, this is another schoolyard case. We have a bunch of these. We think ETs are doing this on purpose and trying to show themselves off. And we predict there's going to be more major schoolyard sightings. And little did they know, 2 weeks later, Westall High School would happen. And Raymond Fowler, another of my favorite researchers, because he's just so honest and hardworking and thorough, and most famous, of course, for Betty Andreasson and her books. But really I have all his books. They're fantastic. He did the Allagash abduction. He wrote a really wonderful general book on UFOs. He said after the Hillsdale case that of the cases he had investigated that year, which he determined were unexplained, which were about 15, 8, over half, were over schools. And John Keel said the same thing at the same time.
Wow. So
this is something that was recognized early on. And I have so many cases.
Do you have any, sorry to interrupt you, Preston, do you have any interviews or anything like that where, maybe as an adult, they remember being contacted or having that experience by chance?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. You were probably going to share that and I interrupted you. Okay.
No, not at all. Please interrupt anytime. Yeah, this is something that the children remember for the rest of their lives. And most of the reports I got really came from adults who had their experience as children.
Right.
And like with the Broadhaven case, they have reunions. And they had a reunion for the Rosie Ball Elementary School case, which was really cool too.
Wow, that's cool.
Giant UFO with a silver dome comes over and they're like, teacher, look. The teacher looks up, like, oh my God. Teachers see this in half the cases. Half.
That's awesome.
And I think one of my favorite cases occurred in New Zealand at Richmond Elementary School. This is in Maranui, New Zealand. And there was 2 teachers on the playground there, 400 kids. And teachers are just supervising when suddenly they notice nobody's talking. All the sounds of the kids screaming and laughing and playing go completely dead silent. And so Mr. Coveney, that's his name, is looking around at the kids, and they're all looking up at the sky with their with their mouths open and pointing. And And so he looks up at the sky and cannot believe his eyes. It's a gigantic black shiny disc, and it's coming for the school.
Wow.
And so slowly approaching, gets over the school. It's covering 1/3 of the sky. This thing is
Whoa.
massive, totally silent, glistening. A kid goes up to Mr. Coffin and says, teacher, is that a UFO? He says, yeah, I think it is. And it stayed there for 10 to 15 minutes, perfectly still, putting on its little display. And it's not doing anything. It's, in the vast majority of these cases, kids are just in awe. They're, it's fun. There's a few where they panicked, like nobody's business. I mean, but in this case, no, they're just staring at it. And finally, it behaved in the same way it did at the Melbourne case. It turns up on its side and zooms off real fast.
That's a good show.
Yeah, leaving no doubt that this is not, anything we can explain.
That we have. Yeah. So the case in Africa, I believe Zimbabwe, you said that there was extraterrestrials. It was that case, right? Where the extraterrestrials actually came out of the ship. Do you recall? I don't recall the details of it, but I remember hearing about it. Do you recall? Did they communicate with the children or anything like that? Do you know?
Oh, yeah. Of
Okay.
course I know. Yes.
Of course you do. What a question. I forgot who I was talking to here. Okay.
No, I love these cases. I mean, oh man. Yes, they did communicate with a handful of students. And these students were within feet of these beings. They came right up to the edge of the playground, which was sort of not fenced off, but there were eucalyptus logs. And so they were about 3 feet away from these students.
Wow.
And there was a weird time aspect. Some students said it is as if time stopped or time slowed down. There was a confusion about time. And you know what that means?
Sure.
That's a red flag for an onboard encounter.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which has never been verified in this case, or really in the vast majority of these cases. There are a few. I'm getting reports now of people. Oh gosh, some of the reports I'm getting are unbelievable. I'm getting distracted here, but I just have to tell you before I forget. A lady contacted me. She's like, yeah, Grays would come into our school and pull off a handful of students and teach us in this corner of the school itself. And another lady's like, oh, we had a substitute teacher who was really, she only came once. She took us out on the playground and a UFO came down. We all had missing time. Next thing we know, it's an hour later and she ushers us back into class and they never saw her. I'm like, ugh.
That's crazy.
But anyway, with the Ariel Elementary School case, yes, they did communicate with a handful of students. Emily Trim is one of them who has come out as a contactee. She started having contacts following this. So I think sometimes they're choosing people. But they told her, you are getting way too technological. Mind you, this is like a 12-year-old girl out in Zimbabwe, Africa, which is forested and wild animals. And I mean, this is not technological there really at all. And they're saying, you're getting way too technological. There's a good way to use technology and a bad way, and you can do better. That was her message. And another got the message, you need to stop chopping down the forests. If all the forests go away, many people will die. And another was told to stop pollution and that the air will become poisonous. And those were the various messages, were all along the lines of environmentalism. 1994, mind you. When
I was just going to ask you what year that was. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not like, that's a big issue, especially there.
Yeah. That seems to be a big theme with communication from extraterrestrials, doesn't it? In the past.
Yeah, it's so clever. I see exactly what they're doing. There was another case in Bankery, Scotland, which I love because it has its same weird aspects to it. It fits the pattern so well. It was at the exact end of the school day. Everyone's getting let out. And the main witness, gosh, I forget her name, Joan. That's right, Joan Torrance. And she sees this giant circle on the ground, a shadow, and it's going towards the school. It's on the playground there. She looks up, as does everybody, and there's 100 people there, including janitors and teachers.
Wow.
who are right behind her, by the way. And it's this giant sort of sombrero-shaped metallic object. And it slows down and stops over the school, right over the steeple, right over the building. I got a picture of it, of the building, not the UFO.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But some people, they have gotten photos, by the way, and moving
Nice.
films. But in this case, so it stops like 50 feet over the school building. There it is, low level, and stops. And Jones, like, time seemed to stop. And this is something I keep hearing.
Mhm.
It makes me wonder.
Mhm.
At any rate, everyone's just completely silent. They're staring at it, and all the kids are looking at the teachers. And this thing stays there, and then it starts spinning. It makes a loud whining noise and darts off over Glasgow. And all the kids go running home. Mommy, Daddy, I saw a UFO. And they're like, kids, shut up. You're supposed to be seen and not heard. And that's
Yeah.
back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And then the newspapers came out the next day, and the kids are like, I told you. It's a cool case. And I know exactly what these ETs are doing. They're showing themselves off, but why? Why would they do that? Why show themselves to kids? To announce their presence. Okay, but why? Why do they want us to know they're here? And after just analyzing these cases, I've come to the conclusion that the agenda behind announcing their presence is a movement towards open official contact and normalizing the subject.
Yes. I agree. That's, my gut tells me that too, my intuition, because it's the children, right, that bring all these things forward. Adults, or sometimes with some adults, it's too late.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. I mean, they can reach some of us, but with the children, that's why a lot of contact begins in childhood, right?
Yeah, almost as a rule, especially for people who have regular contact.
Right.
But not always. I've talked to many people who've had a real big one-off.
Oh, okay.
But this leads me to the drive-in movie
Yes, I want
encounters.
to hear about that. I used to go to drive-ins. That was fun.
Yeah, those were the days.
Yeah.
And I'm one of 6 kids, so they're like, get in the safety seat, hide. We'll sneak you in. I'm like, okay.
That's funny.
So yeah, drive-ins were huge in the they started around the 30s, 20s and 30s, and were started to really get popular in the 50s and 60s and 70s, were their heyday. It was actually the #1 American pastime.
Really?
And
Nice.
was just an enormous thing for the US and partly Canada and a little bit in other countries, but really this is very much Americana. And they would give balloon rides and petting zoos and pre-shows, and had playgrounds and all kinds of free gift giveaways to attract people. It was huge.
Well, I don't remember any of that. That was before, obviously, not at the right drive-in or before my time.
Yeah, I never got a balloon ride either.
I know, right?
But I do remember there being playgrounds.
Oh, okay.
And snack bars was always cool.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just a cool way to watch a movie because you're, with your family in your own car. And
right.
Remember the little attachable speakers?
Yes. Yes.
So at any rate, I was writing research for UFOs over Colorado, a book I had done. And I ran into 3 cases in a row of UFOs hovering over drive-in theaters. And I instantly thought of Claudia Blasios, this girl at work, where I worked at my office, and she found out I was a UFO researcher. She's like, "Oh, have I got a story for you?" I'm like, "Oh, goody, tell me." Oh, I miss Claudia. She's so much fun. And she says, "Well, I was just a little kid, and my little sister and my parents went to a movie They had a VW bug, and this is at the Panorama drive-in in Panorama, California, Southern California. And she said suddenly she noticed that people were running by the car, dropping their popcorn and drinks and screeching out of the parking lot.
Oh.
And she's like, huh. And she turns and looks at her parents because she's just kind of fiddling in the back seat. And her parents are entranced, hypnotized, not even really responding, staring at something. And she looks, and there's a giant UFO, classic flying saucer. I'm like, what did it look like, Claudia? She says, you know how a spoon, a shiny silver spoon looked like that? That was the texture. I'm like, oh, chrome-like. She's like, yes, almost mirror-like. She said it had, she didn't remember any portholes, but it had colored lights all around it. It was really beautiful. She could hear it. There were people screaming, but she could hear it going whoosh, 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 kind of making a whirring sound. And it is below the level of the screen, to the right of the screen. And it's about 50 feet across because it's, comparable to the screen itself. And just staying there. And she says all she really remembers is that. I'm like, well, how did it end? She's like, well, this is where it gets a little weird. And I'm like, oh, the Twilight, yeah, the Twilight Zone is playing in my head as she's describing what happened next. She says, I don't remember leaving. And in fact, we didn't talk about it. And we completely forgot about it. I'm like, what do you mean you completely forgot? Because I keep hearing this. It always irks me when witnesses say this. And I understand it. I mean, I've had this happen to me where you forget a sighting. But it's a sign of contact. This is a sign of something, deeper levels of contact than people are remembering. And she did not remember until she was in the kitchen some 5 years. Oh, I don't know how many years. It was some years later, not much longer because she was still a teenager. So, she was with her mom, and the radio comes on, and there's a call. It's a call-in show, and this guy calls in. He's like, I was at the Panorama Drive-In. And this UFO came down to the right of the screen. And he starts describing it. And Claudia's like, Mom, do you remember that? We were there. And she's like, yes, I do. And Claudia's like, well, what happened? Why didn't we talk about it? Mom's like, I have no idea. That was amazing. So there's an amnesia aspect in some of these.
Sure.
But when I heard that, when I read those 3 cases in Colorado, and I instantly thought of Claudia's case, which I thought was a one-off. I'm like, there's nothing like this has ever happened before. This is a crazy sighting. I love it, but I don't think this is a thing. Never even crossed my mind that this could be, because there's hundreds of people watching this. And so I'm like, okay, let's dig in.
Yeah, let me ask you a question real quick, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So with the memory thing, and it is probably both, but do you believe that the memory is suppressed by us usually, or by the extraterrestrials? Or I guess it could be both, depending on the situation. What did your research tell you, or your intuition tell you on that?
Initially, I'm pretty dead set on saying this is the ETs, because I've interviewed a number of people who were told by you will not remember this. Oh, yes, I will. No, you won't. Oh, yeah, I'm going to remember. And there's a back and forth. Got a few cases like that. But then I ran across a case where the ETs are like, you remember? And the guy's like, well, yeah, I do. And they're like, well, no one else remembers. It's not us doing it. it's you guys. And now I'm interviewing a lady from Florida, and I asked her about this because she's a full conscious contactee. And I'm like, what do you think about this? She's the subject of my next book, Dolly. And
I met her online the other day.
Yeah, she's amazing. And at any rate, so I asked her about this, and she's like, oh, no, it's you. I'm like, I don't think so, because I started telling her cases. She's like, well, here's the situation. Some people choose not to remember, and they will reinforce that for you. And we know that people have that ability to not remember.
Yeah.
And
I
we
know I
see,
do.
yeah, we see this with particularly traumatic incidents. I mean, this is a rule with childhood trauma,
Sure.
particularly if it's severe, or war trauma victims, any kind of trauma, people, or if anything's out of your worldview, you will gloss over it, you will deny it, you will give it another explanation, you will put it in a back drawer in your mind. So this is psychologists and psychiatrists know this. It's called denial, and we are good at it. And so I'm sort of 50-50 on that.
Yeah.
I honestly think the ETs are doing it in a lot of these cases.
Mm-hmm.
But
What's it? Yeah, in my experience and in my what I recall, because it's taken me a while to recall my experiences, years and years and years, as well as my near-death experience. It took me a couple of years to get information. I'm still getting more information on it, and my experiences, my extraterrestrial experiences. But I do remember some of them touching here and telling me, "I will forget," or "You will not remember. You will forget," touching my forehead.
wow.
Yeah, that's now coming to me, those memories. So I believe that it was so that I could live my life without having to process this stuff that our conscious mind maybe can't handle in this type of, in our environment, where that's something that's pretty crazy, because it can drive you crazy.
Yeah.
As you're trying to, do whatever you do, make a living, get married, have kids, whatever we're supposed to do, which I didn't do any of that anyway. But it's interesting because just the other day in my evening meditations, I saw full blown an angel come down, and I felt it was Michael, to be honest with you, and touched me right here. And I saw all this light, and I felt like he was bringing forward some things that maybe, because that's my goal now, is to bring forward a bunch of memories that are repressed.
Yeah, I wish I could remember, because I had a missing time incident. I think I told you I had a little orb come down in front of my car.
And I think so.
Yeah,
Remind me again.
Yeah, 1992, driving home from my brother's house, an orb drops down in front of the car late at night and darts off. And I forgot it, completely forgot it. A couple of months later, I remembered it, but I don't remember driving home. I didn't turn around and tell my brother, "Oh my God, I don't remember anything." And that's missing time.
Yeah.
And I want to know what happened. But I can see why, I might have chosen not to, or that it was suppressed intentionally by the ETs, because I'm a researcher and I'm researching it, and that would have pulled me off track, and to a certain extent. And I don't know. I'm kind of like a little bit. But yeah, Charles Moody, very well-known abductee from 1960s, one of the first. I love the early cases. Sergeant Charles Moody was in, I think it was outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, driving along, went out of town to watch a meteor shower. It's parked, sees his meteor. It's not a meteor, it's a flying saucer. It comes and lands, and he sees ETs come out, and they pull him out, and that's all he really remembered. And a couple of weeks later, it all came pouring back into his mind. And the ETs told him during this experience, he remembers now, that you will not remember this for 2 weeks, is what they told him.
Oh, they told him 2 weeks. Interesting.
And it will come back to you. And this is the same thing that happened to John Hunter Gray and his, John Jr. They remembered afterwards. It's another well-known case.
Okay.
But the point is, they do this to, I think, psychologically protect people.
I agree. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I could talk about sightings all day long. So we're going to have to talk more about that. But I wanted to talk about a couple other things, if you're okay with moving on.
Okay.
Was there something else you wanted to share about that? About the drive-ins?
Yeah, there was a couple of cases. Could we just real quick?
Of course. Yes.
the
I
whole
want to hear.
display, this whole display aspect. There was one that's just so crazy. It's like in Mentor, Ohio, which is interesting to me because I got this great schoolyard case there too. I think this is the Mentor, Ohio one where it's a cigar-shaped ship shows up, and this time it's not next to the screen, it's to the side, but it's very low level. And they stopped the movie because no one's watching the movie at this point. And at this point, this cigar-shaped thing turns vertical, and out comes a saucer, and then another, and then another, and then another, and then 10 of them come out and start putting on a display.
Wow.
For I think it was 20 minutes, full
So
on
cool.
display. Like, you want a show? We'll give you a show. And after that,
They have a better show, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's often the headline. I didn't find any of these in books, by the way. These were almost all in newspapers exclusively. I scoured my books and they just weren't there.
Well, I'm surprised. Well, that's good that they were even in newspapers, because you don't hear about that kind of stuff nowadays in the mainstream media.
Yeah. Well, we're starting to hear more. It's good. It is getting coverage, not as much as it should.
It is on the internet.
Yeah,
but
not mainstream news.
Not mainstream news. No, not that I've noticed.
No, but there
not
are
that
UFO,
I watch it.
There are UFO shows, so
that's true. You have to go away from mainstream to get the real information, to get the truth.
Yeah, well, let's face it, mainstream news covers about 3 things.
And we know what that is.
Celebrities, scandals, shootings.
It's all fear porn. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was just a case I had to tell you about. And one other case, if I can, real quick, because I love it.
It's your show, buddy.
All right. I love this case. It's just so, I was able to interview the guy personally, Pat Mitchell. It was at the South Hutch Theater in South Hutchinson, Kansas, with his friend. They're 19 years old. This is late 60s. There to watch James Bond, the latest James Bond feature. And they get the center parking lot, space, center space right in front of the screen. And, they put up the speaker, they got their popcorn, the movie's going. It's a really exciting part when Pat's friend says, "Do you see that? Do you see that light?" And Pat's like, "Of course I see it." It was way right in line with the screen, but way off in the distance and approaching and getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And then boom, it's there. And it's a giant flying saucer, classic, right to the right of the screen. It's always right above the screen, literally almost touching it, 10 to 50 feet above the screen, or to the left or to the right. And they're showing themselves off to 300-400 people at a time on purpose. So I estimate it's like 100,000 people they've done this to.
Yeah.
And those are the cases I could find.
Wow.
In this case, it stayed there for 5 minutes. Goes behind the screen, is completely lost from view, and it must have been 10 feet behind the screen. Goes to the left and goes up, stays there 5 minutes, does a complete circle around the entire theater once. So deliberate, and then goes off to the street and starts moving at 10 miles to 20 miles per hour right over the street. And so it clears the theater.
Clears it? Everyone hightailed it out of there?
They wanted to follow it.
Flat. Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, there was no panic in this case. Sometimes there is. Then people flash their lights, are honking horns, and it'll flash lights back. It'll turn off the movie. It'll make, I could go on and on with this stuff, but just this last case, because it's so wild, it sends this convoy of like 30 cars at least down this little road for 6 miles, leading them along, and stops, pulls off the road. The UFO goes up another 100 feet. So it's like 500 feet up now, and stays there. And everyone's just, oh my God, looking at it. And finally it darts straight up. It's this tiny little star-like object, and it's gone. Not in any newspaper. People went to the newspaper's office, reported it, not a single story. Pat was sure there would, well, he knew people were going to the newspaper. And he worked there as a photographer. So he went there a couple of days later and like, what about the drive-in UFO? Where's the story? And they're like, what story? What drive-in? He's like, oh, I was there. And they said, we're not interested. And that's when rumors flew around town that government showed up. And that's not the only case where this was absolutely quashed.
What year was that?
That was 68, 66, around there.
That's when it started happening then.
Yep. And I know they know. I know, no, they know. I found proof. I found absolute proof.
Did you? Yeah.
Terrorist drive-in. It showed up at Terrorist drive-in, and there was a bunch of people saw it. The sheriff, Leroy Hatfield, took a report from 30 witnesses and sent it off to the Air Force, which was Project Blue Book, the precursor. This is one of the early sightings, 52. And they wrote up a report marked action. I found this report. And they sent it to the commanding general of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and Ent Air Force Base, where we track incoming and outgoing traffic, and to the director of intelligence at Washington, D.C. Wow. This makes me want to use a bad word.
Yeah. Crazy. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but that's where we are. That's why we're so behind in our development, because of everything that's been covered up.
But that's 100 cases. I ended up writing a book about it. Over 100 cases.
That's crazy. So, yeah, drive-ins, people are outside. They're, when you're watching a movie, you're kind of hypnotized. So they're in an open state.
Exactly.
What better way to show yourselves?
It's perfect. People are saying, oh, maybe they're there to watch the movie. And I looked into that because they're like, well, what kind of movie was it? It's every movie. It's Simpsons, the Simpsons movie. It was King Kong. It was The Exorcist, Jurassic Park, Outlaw Josie Wales, you name it. And there are a few where they stayed there the entire duration of the movie. So maybe, or maybe maybe they're studying our emotions, because we know they're interested in that. But no, they're there to show off, because they blink lights, they release smaller craft, they come zoom. Why are they hovering over the screen? If they want to watch the movie, they would be behind.
Yeah. They want your attention. So they are the movie.
Yep. And that's always the headline. UFO steals the show. In fact, it happened so much at this theater in Canada that they said, you want to see a UFO? Come to our drive-in. It was happening it was kept visiting this same theater.
Oh, that's crazy. That's awesome, man.
Visited the Yuma theater in Arizona 3 times.
Wow.
Over
same
decades.
Ships?
Probably. I don't know. I don't have evidence of that, but it wouldn't surprise me a bit.
Yeah. Same peeps. I love that. So they've been showing themselves for so long. It's just been suppressed, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, you can't hide the sky. So good luck with the cover-up.
Yeah, exactly. Although they are trying to, with what they're spraying in the sky. That's my opinion. What I believe. They're trying to hide a lot in the sky and do a lot. But anyway, we're not going to go down that road. So we're here to have fun. That's awesome. I love those stories.
I know I don't think people have any idea. I had no idea at all.
When you were a kid, do you remember any, when you were going to the drive-in with or even as an adult, do you remember any missing time?
No, I was just a kid. I remember seeing Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Yeah.
And I don't remember seeing anything like that.
Yeah.
But boy, when I put that book out, people started calling me. And boy, was it a delight to hear. Awesome. Like, wow, this is a thing. I mean, I knew it was. I've got 100 cases, but to hear, because every time you get a report, you can times it by 100, because most people do not report. So of the 100 cases I have, times that by 100 easy. That's 10,000.
And you have 100 in your book?
Yeah, 100 in the book, times that by 100, that's 10,000 cases.
10,000,
and when you consider there's 400 people at the theater, that's 400,000 people.
That's nice.
So you're
Yeah.
looking at like 500,000 people who've been introduced to UFOs at drive-in theaters.
Just right, just at the drive-in.
Yeah, that's my conservative estimate. And I know
Yeah.
that sounds off the charts, but the math doesn't lie.
I've always felt that there are a lot more people that have had experiences or seen things than, I mean, it's just, and that it's probably a huge number of the population. You know what I mean? What there's 7 point something billion people in the world. Well, and then deduce down to how many people would have the opportunity to look up at the sky, or have, to what, 6 billion maybe, or more than that. I think everyone's seen something, almost everyone.
Yeah, it's funny because people will tell me that I haven't seen anything. I'm like, well, I've never seen anything.
Yeah.
And you question them, and they're like, well, there was that one time.
Yeah.
I saw a light, because people have, again, the denial factor, the ridicule factor has been quite effective.
Yeah, that programming. But it's going away. People are, I think it's, when you talk to people about that kind of stuff now, it's almost, it's the norm.
Yeah, just go look at the stars. I don't understand the resistance to the idea even of extraterrestrials. I mean, I kind of do, because I was a skeptic. But even as a skeptic, I knew that the ETs had to exist. I mean, the universe is so, like, I'm sure you've seen the Hubble telescope. They did a postage stamp section of the sky and found like 300 galaxies or something crazy.
And it's pretty arrogant to think that we're the only intelligent beings out there. That's pretty arrogant, because we're not really that intelligent when you think about it, compared to the grand scheme of what intelligence is, in my opinion. So yeah, there's got to be so much more.
Yeah, and it really irritates me when people say, oh, there might not be ETs. This could be an intelligence playing a charade on us. I'm like, oh, why would you even think that? That's so anthropocentric. And where does that leave us as the only beings in the universe? People say it's demonic. I'm like, really?
Oh yeah.
You think so
much programming.
I've studied, all of the ghosts and paranormal, and I can tell you that there are bad spirits, but if you think it's demonic, why not angelic? Isn't there more angels than demons? I mean, there are 2/3 more, according to traditional religious thought.
Yeah.
So that would mean at least 2/3 of them are angelic.
Right. And we're so programmed to, the conscious mind, as you know, is so programmed to go to the fear angle of it always, if it's something we don't understand or don't know about. I found that out with my out-of-body experiences.
Yes, fear. I had to learn to overcome fear. There's a lot of fear training, but the universe is safe. It's absolutely safe.
Yeah.
We're immortal beings.
We are. We're so programmed to be afraid of death. And that's the bottom line right there, right?
Yep. Death is the wrong word.
It is.
Because people have come to equate it with end and destruction and loss. And it's not that at all.
It's transition.
Right. It's moving to Hawaii is what it really is.
I like that. Yeah.
It's more and more. I think that every time I have an out-of-body experience and I see the flowers, I'm like, oh, this is so nice. This is like living in Tahiti. You're on vacation. Yeah. Bring out the margaritas. Let's lay down on the beach and have some fun.
I know, right? Yeah, people are, and there's a lot of programming when it comes out of body experiences too, of fear, and it's all programming. So speaking of paranormal, then I want to talk a little bit about out of body experiences. Speaking of the paranormal, can you share, because I know you just mentioned that you've done a lot of research with the paranormal. Can you share any of those experiences that really stick out in your mind? Because I've experienced a lot of paranormal stuff, and I think that contact goes together with that, doesn't it? Kind of, sort of.
Yeah. And paranormal is a word that I'm liking less and less.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Because, or like extraordinary, never ever made sense to me. I mean, it's not only ordinary, it's more than ordinary. It's especially, no, this is absolutely normal. Paranormal is normal.
Yeah. That's what I say too. Yeah.
It really is, because Telepathy has been proven in a laboratory setting
Mhm.
repeatedly.
Nice.
Telepathy is real. Telekinesis has absolutely been proven in a laboratory setting repeatedly. Levitation, precognition, healing, all of this stuff is normal. And yeah, I've written books on ghosts. Uh, I'd love to talk a little bit about levitation.
Please do.
Because that is so extraordinary, and people think, oh yeah, right, humans can't, flying, are you kidding me? Maybe a yogi in ancient India or something. I'm like, well, yeah, absolutely. Yogis in ancient India. So I ended up writing a book on human levitation because our family friend Mary, I'm talking to her, I'm like, have you ever had an unusual experience? She says, well, I flew as a child. I'm like, oh, really? You flew? She's like, yes, and this is why I don't tell people about it, because they always roll their eyes. I'm like, I'm sorry. Tell me what happened.
Wow.
She said, I was a little girl and I was running. She was visiting the doctor's office with her parents. She went running down this corridor to get to the office before them, turned the corner and flew all the way to the end of the corridor, turned another corner, still flying, and went all the way to the end of that corridor. So several hundred feet, and landed on her 2 feet and looked around to see how the heck that could have happened. And I'm like, are you sure, Mary? Are you sure? She's like, I'm telling you, I flew. Why does no one ever believe me? I'm like, I'm sorry. It's just, I'm thinking of the only time I've ever heard of levitation, which was in college. And I'm going through the books shelves there, and I came upon this guy, Saint Joseph of Cupertino, who lived in, I think it was 1500s, maybe 1400s, Middle Ages. And he was this monk who became very well known for his, quote, ecstatic trances, where he suddenly found this religious trance. If ever he saw a baby lamb or a picture of Jesus or a crucifix or heard children singing religious hymns, he was very religious, he would rise up into the air. And this was witnessed by many hundreds, if not thousands of people. And they've got the testimonies from hundreds of people, hundreds.
So she was flying down the hallway.
Yeah. And when she told me that story, I instantly thought of this incident in college years earlier, where I'd come upon this account of a gentleman by the name of Saint Joseph of Cupertino in Italy, who was known as the Flying Friar of Europe, and attracted huge crowds of thousands of people to watch him levitate. And it's very well attested. I think it's probably one of the best known cases out there. I'm like, wow, human levitation. And then there was another case in that same book about Saint Teresa of Avila in Spain. And she had like 10 instances of levitation in front of people. I'm like, okay, human levitation, is this a thing? And when when Mary told me that, I'm like, okay, let's research this. Because by then I'm, researching UFOs, and I had pretty much come to the conclusion that this is all connected to the paranormal as well, because people who have UFO encounters have a lot of paranormal coming at them. And I can tell you, I've now confirmed just recently that this is absolutely something that does happen to contactees. Happened to Whitley Strieber, happened to Stephen Greer, happened to Dolly, the lady I'm interviewing currently. This is something that happens following a UFO experience. Bud Hopkins has cases.
Do you have any theory on that?
I sure do. I absolutely do. Because this is very connected to out-of-body experiences. Robert Monroe, the out-of-body guy, had 2 instances of levitation. Marilyn Hughes, one of my favorite out-of-body authors and experiencers, had 2 instances of levitation as well. And some of the guys who have written out-of-body books. There's another guy, he also had a levitation episode, and researchers who have looked into levitation feel that it is connected to that. And what happens when someone is a contactee is they're upgraded somehow. Their what do you call it? Your bioelectric field is supercharged, and they will start buzzing up radios, knocking out lights, computers. And that's what it's connected to. It's connected to your chi, your prana, your life force, your astral connection. Because we fly naturally on the other side.
I know, it's my favorite thing to do.
I love it. I did it all last night. Like flying around.
Yeah, I just had an experience recently where I was with a bunch of people, and I'm walking through the it's like a retreat or something, and I'm walking, and I think, why am I walking? I can fly. So then I started flying everywhere.
Yeah,
because it's like, why walk?
It's funny. Whenever I'm having an out-of-body experience and I see people walking, I'm like, why aren't you flying?
Yeah,
like, you can fly? I'm like, yeah, I'll show you how. It's not hard.
Oh, I get the same thing. It seems like the only people interested are the children. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. In fact, that's what happened last night. I'm like, hey, a kid was there with his mom. I'm like, you can fly. And I showed him how.
Yeah.
And he flew, he hit the wall and bam, went to the ground. I'm like,
they love it.
Yeah. But when I found out levitation was real from my dear friend Mary, actually my father's friend, family friend, so I'm like, okay, let's ask everyone I know, because that's what I did with UFOs. And levitation, I never even considered this as a possibility. And I can tell you right off the bat that people, I thought I was off my rocker. People are like, fine with ghosts, fine with UFOs, telepathy, precognition. They're like, no, levitating people can't fly. I'm like, yeah. I started to research. I'm like, yes, they can. And I found over 350 cases.
Wow.
Stretching back longer than 2,000 years. I mean, way back, but really all throughout recorded history and in every culture. It's treated differently in each culture. The Eastern cultures think of it as a fostered natural talent, one that you can cultivate. Whereas throughout Europe, it was either interpreted as possession by the devil or as an ecstatic religious trance caused by God. And Native Americans, they learned how to do it as a cultivated talent. Sorcerers in Africa could do it. Everyone had their own ways of approaching it. Often it's breathing exercises or meditation or ritual.
So we can do it. We just forgot how.
Yeah. And I asked everyone I knew, and I found one other person. I was so delighted. I'm like, oh my God, I was starting to think I was crazy. But she's like, no, I would fly up and down the stairs. I'm like, seriously? She's like, yes, over and over again. Happened at least a dozen times.
When she was a child?
Yep. And that's why I ended up putting a chapter in the book. I ended up, of course, writing a book about this. I called it the floating stage, when children fly, because I got a bunch of cases of children flying up and often up and down staircases. It's the weirdest thing that staircases would prompt this.
Wow.
I kind of get that, because I remember as a kid jumping, we would play games on the stairs.
Yeah. I have a lot of dreams like that where I'm flying, or just kind of not touching the steps, but just flying. And it's some out of bodies too, but I'm just flying down the stairs and not, like it's a rolling, like the steps are rolling or something. I'm not touching them, but I don't know, I can't explain it. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I've had that too.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like
I remember one recently where there was somebody at the bottom of the steps. He was asking me to come down, and I was on a ship. Now that I think about it, good thing I journal all this stuff. And so I'm scooting down the steps, not touching them, just flying down the steps, above the steps. And I said, "Did you see how I just flew down those steps?" I told him that. I was so proud of myself.
Oh, it's so much fun. I've tried to levitate, physically myself, but I haven't. But I found another guy later. He's like, oh yeah, he was very, very spiritual, doing all kinds of meditation, and ended his meditation and just felt himself zinging with energy and jumped up and went right across his room, touched the wall.
Wow.
Interviewed another guy who was a contactee following his UFO experience. He went into his room. He's a little kid, floated right up to the ceiling, and he's walking along the ceiling with his hands.
Oh man.
Told his mind he had several instances. Interviewed another lady from Colorado. She's like, oh yeah, I've levitated. I mean, like physically, because people say, oh yeah, and they start describing an out-of-body experience. I'm like, no, physically.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yes, physically. I was meditating. And like, oh, this is so interesting, because people who do this have a spiritual bent.
Mm-hmm.
They're monks, they're nuns, they're priests, they're sorcerers, they're medicine men. But not all. Some are farmers.
Normal people.
There was a farmer who got really famous in Russia for being able to levitate. And they're like, how do you do it? She says, at will. It's pure willpower. I just think myself up, which is kind of what you do when you're out of body.
When you're out of body. Exactly. I was just thinking the same thing. I had an experience quite a few years ago, I guess about 20 years ago, and it's just coming to mind as you're talking about this, as we're talking about this. I don't know if it was out of body or physical, but I was laying in bed with my ex-partner, my partner at the time, and he's watching TV. And every night before I go to bed, pretty much every night, I do practice or exercises so I can have that conscious awareness to leave my body. And so I was doing that. And the next day, which is really funny, he tells me, oh, by the way, hours and hours later, I saw your head floating above your body, out of the corner of my eye. And when I looked, it disappeared. So I guess that might be out of body, but he saw my head. He saw my head floating.
Yeah, well, you're there. You're primed to do it, because there's another category I call sleeping levitation. And the people who this happens to don't know it. It's the people who walk in and see their poor child floating above the bed.
Wow.
This is a thing. And that lady I was talking to about, who flew up and down the stairs, she says, I don't know if this is related or not. And of course it was, because as soon as she said it, I'm like, yes, it's related. She says, I could run faster than anyone in the neighborhood. I had a way of running, she said, where it was like I was barely touching the ground. And I'm instantly thinking of, when I'm doing that out of body, because sometimes you're running on your tiptoes, and you're like, doing. And Stephen Greer talked about that, how he was taking big leaping bounds. And
in the physical.
Yep. And this is what Native American runners do, because they didn't, they didn't have horses initially. Mm-hmm. And they had to travel distances. They'd have people who specialized in running, and they could cover long distances in a short time. And there was one guy who was really well known for it. And this was during the Wild West, right? When Europe has already come and taken over and wreaking havoc. So they followed this guy, and they had his footprints, and they noticed his footprints getting wider and wider and wider, and then they disappeared. And they finally got to the location, which was another city some hundreds of miles away, and found out he had been there for like 4 days. And he's like, what took you so long? They can, it's related to teleportation.
Yeah.
There's a group of individuals called the Flying Men, which involves women as well. But they have the ability to teleport. It's this little secret school in modern times of people who have mastered this ability. And the Tibetans could do it. They called it the Longam-pa. And these are people who, through breathing exercises, are able to gather enough prana to do what they call, supernatural running. This is another category. It's running levitation. I broke it down into 7 categories. There's ecstatic or religious levitation. There's spontaneous. This occurs during falls, usually, or illness. People will fall down a cliff and float down.
Oh, I've done that. Not a cliff, but down the steps.
That's what happened to Robert Monroe. That's levitation, Sharon.
Yeah, I guess you just don't think about it at the moment because you're so freaked out about falling. But yeah, I've done that before.
Yeah, and some is definitely related to, demonic possession or hauntings, because people who are going through a horrific poltergeist infestation will have that.
Mhm.
Or in which some researchers think poltergeists are uncontrolled mediumship. I
Mhm.
think there's,
That's what I think too.
yeah, I think there's
Yeah.
probably validity to that.
Yeah.
But so there's ecstatic or religious levitation, there's sleeping levitation, there's running levitation, there's spontaneous levitation, meditational levitation. I broke it all down because these are all different
Wow.
categories, which I think ultimately is the mechanism is the same. We have this ability.
Yes. Do you have in your book, because I'm getting your book, do you have in your book how to do it?
Yes,
Yay. Okay.
which is kind of silly because I am writing a how-to book when I can't do it myself.
Not yet.
Not yet. But I wrote down all the different cultures' approach to this, and they do have. I mean, there's a practice called pranayama, which is specifically geared towards this, where you breathe in for a certain number of seconds, retain your breath for a certain number,
Mhm.
and exhale for a certain number. And it's supposed to be done with a guided teacher because breathing exercises are pretty
Intense.
yeah, I guess that's a good word for it.
Yeah, they can bring up a lot.
Yeah, they can cause all kind of effects. So you're supposed to have a
Mhm.
guide to do it. But yeah, a lot of them involve, the St. Joseph of Cupertino just did it by prayer, intense prayer. St. Catherine
Wow.
of Siena, same thing. She started levitating when she was a little girl because
So that would intense prayer would be like mantra, maybe?
yeah, just focusing on the other side, the love of God
Yeah.
will do it. And
Mhm.
if you ever done meditation, you start to get glimpses of the other side and the
Mhm.
divine light, and you start seeing ghosts, and you can see how this would work.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And levitation, real quick, has been proven in a laboratory setting by Hereward Carrington and by Colonel Rochas. Hereward Carrington did it with the finger levitation game. You know that?
Oh,
Where,
yes. What is it? Light as a feather, stiff as a
yeah,
board.
exactly. This
Mhm.
is a childhood game, and
Yes, and it works
it does. And
when you're kids.
so he brought in a group of, I think it was 5 people, put them on a massive platform scale. A wooden chair, one guy sits in the chair, 4 people get around and do rhythmic breathing for 5 minutes. He's got the weight measured. I forget what it was. It was like 400 something, 500 something pounds, 600, whatever.
Mhm.
And so he's like, okay, do the rhythmic breathing and then lift this guy up. Hold your breath and lift. And weightlifters always do that too, by the way.
Oh, do they?
Breathe, and retain their breath, and then they lift.
Okay. So holding their breath gives them the strength, the
Yes.
push.
This is very much related to breath, which is spirit, which is respiratory. It's all related to this. So at any rate, he does this. And the first attempt, he recorded a loss of weight. I think it was 47 pounds. And they did it again, 42 pounds. Did it again, 43. Did it again, 47, 47, 47, 47. Over and over again. Crazy.
That's crazy. That is crazy.
I really want to do that experiment as a scientist.
Yeah.
The scientist in me is like, let's do this.
47 pounds. So that's crazy. Well, I'm not scientific at all, but I read the book. Oh, shoot. Oh, it'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, it has all of the stuff like you're talking about where the science has proven what the metaphysical world and ancient studies already know, right? And so these scientific studies that are really crazy. But in the book, it talks about how the atom, I believe, is like 99% nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is how people walk through walls. This is how people turn invisible. This is how people levitate.
Mhm.
I will tell you that in about 10% of the levitation cases, people emit visible light out of their bodies. This happened to Bernard Raelino. They came rushing into his cell. He was, one of these religious monk guys, because they thought there was a fire. It wasn't a fire. It was him
It was him.
floating in the middle of the room during prayer. Repeatedly
Yeah.
did it.
So what we consider solid matter is mostly nothing. I can't think of a word, but nothing.
Light.
Light. Thank you. Thank you. It is something. Thank you. Light. Yes.
Yeah. And you get a real taste of this during your out-of-body experiences to the higher realms.
Yeah.
Where everything is made of light. It glows. Right. It's pearlescent. It's so, I love anything sparkly now because it sparkles on the other side, like morning dew on a summer.
Yes. That reminds me of an experience I had. I might have shared this with you with our talk about out-of-body experiences, but I had a projection, and I went out into the backyard, and it was dewy out. Right, I could feel that it was dewy, and I live in Oregon, so that's pretty normal. But the dew was so sparkly. It was beautiful, and I'm thinking, this is so beautiful, all this sparkly dew. And then a couple of days later, I'm walking my dog, and it was nighttime, and it's dewy still in the atmosphere, and I have a flashlight with me, and I see exactly what I was seeing in my out-of-body experience. The light shining on the dew made it sparkly, and I realized the dew was that was my light that was shining, because there wasn't anything else around. It was just me and the dew. So I was shining the light on the dew, creating that sparkle.
Wow. Yeah, that happened to me once when I was out of body. I'm flying along, and I'm like, there's a circle of light on the ground below me, kind of, well, a blobby circle sort of. I'm like, wow, look at that light, because it looked special. I mean, it was that kind of white, divine, sparkly light. And so immediately I turn around, and I'm thinking there's a UFO above me or something, and there's nothing. I'm like, well, that's weird. I look back down at the ground, and I'm like, I see the light. So I zoom down and I land. And I'm like, oh, it's me.
It's you.
Oh my God. I'm looking, I'm like, oh, wow.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? It makes me think of when you were, and this just came to me as we're talking, when you were talking about, and I've had lots of experiences too, where the plants and everything are just sparkling and so alive, and the colors are so beyond what we can even imagine here. Is it our light that's creating that as we're moving through that experience?
Yeah.
Are they reflecting what we are bringing, the light we're bringing?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think you have a certain energy, resonance, vibration level to you, depending on your level of spiritual development or what is going on. And the higher you go, the more you resonate with that particular level of energy. And I think at some point you begin to realize there is no separation at all between anything.
Right.
And so you are the universe. You are the entire universe. And when you're out of body, you can seep into things and experience it from that vantage point. So you are what you're looking. This is the Heisenberg principle. The observer affects the observed, and that's true, because we are not. The borders between us and the world are illusory, I guess would be the best way of putting it.
Right. Yeah. That's a conundrum for me too. It's that what you were just talking about, how I guess it's the slit experiments, right? That came to the conclusion that something doesn't exist unless it's being observed.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can. That bothers me. It's like,
it bothers me too.
Like, because there's that saying, when a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? I'm like, of course it does. Are you mad? what about the birds? You know, just
So
because-
I know. So does that mean, and I, and I drive myself crazy with these thoughts sometimes. Does that mean that no one else is having a life unless I am am observing them?
yeah,
You get in that circle of
this is one of the
thought.
reasons I don't think that theory like UFOs are a phenomena here to alter our belief systems and putting on a charade is real, because that's not only anthropocentric, it's sort of saying like, well, if you're not looking at the UFO, it's not there.
Yeah.
It's like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. So it's perception too, because a
Yeah.
UFO can appear and some people will see it and some people won't.
Yes, that's wild. They have that ability. I've talked to people who talked to the ETs and said, oh yes, we have the ability to show ourselves to who we want to.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay. I thought, well, I guess that
I'm
makes
not,
sense.
I'm not sure it's necessarily the person and their inabilities. It's the ETs saying, okay, we choose you.
Oh,
And
okay.
you, and not this poor guy because he's not ready.
Right. Yeah, I guess we do have to be ready. Definitely. So much to talk about. All right. Well, you're just gonna have to come back. Sorry.
All right. I will.
Yay. I think we're going to stop there. We've been talking for an hour and a half and we both have lives to get to, but thank you. Thank you, Preston, once more for being here.
Hey, always a pleasure, Sharon. I love doing your show.
No, well,
Fun.
thank you. Yeah, I really enjoy talking with you about all this stuff because it's, as you can tell, it's right up my alley. And you have so much to share.
I live on that same alley.
And the world is the world's waking up, coming in that alley. The alley's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Right? We need more alleys.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you have any parting words that you'd like to share with the audience?
Just release yourself from fear and allow love and truth and compassion to guide you. And UFOs are real, and there is life after death, and we are all immortal. And yeah, have fun. We must have fun and garden. Yeah. And don't buy into the lies.
Yes. Perfect.
So that was quite a mouthful, but
no, that's perfect. That's perfect because that's how we raise our frequency, and that's how we get that all that stuff goes away once we raise our frequency and move up, right?
Yep.
Yeah, all the stuff that's noise goes away. It's just distraction and noise.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here again. And I'm sure you enjoyed our show. I appreciate you always. And please subscribe, like, what else is there to do? Share and comment. If you have anything, let us know how you feel about your thoughts on the show today. So I'll see you again soon. Thank you, Preston.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.